You know, I was sitting in a crowded coffee shop this morning, just listening to the hum of the room.
Mhm.
And it struck me, it's the most natural thing in the world. You open your mouth, you move your tongue, maybe a fraction of an inch, you vibrate your vocal cords, and out comes a sound.
A sound that means something.
Exactly. A sound that carries complex meaning. We do it thousands of times a day.
It is automatic for us.
Yeah.
Well, it's like breathing. But the moment you stop and try to actually describe what your mouth is doing,
Right.
is your tongue touching your teeth? Is the air going through your nose? Is your throat vibrating? It gets incredibly complicated very, very quickly.
Exactly. And that is what we are unpacking today. We're looking at the history of phonetics, basically, the study of how we make speech sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And you might think this history is a straight line. Like, cavemen grunted, then the Greeks wrote some stuff down, and now we have Siri.
But the reality is much more jagged.
Mhm.
It isn't a straight line of progress at all. It's a history that it waxes and wanes. There were moments of absolute brilliance thousands of years ago,
And then nothing.
followed by centuries, millennia, even of silence, where humanity seemed to just forget how to analyze speech.
It is a wild ride. We're going to go from ancient priests in India to kings in Korea to some really macabre experiments with dead bodies in France.
It's a fascinating mix of religion, spelling reform, and eventually pure biology.
So let's dive into the source material. We are looking at a deep historical overview by Michael Casey McMahon. And the mission today is to figure out why humans started analyzing speech in the first place.
Right.
Because usually we don't study things that come naturally. You don't study how to walk unless you're injured.
Exactly. So the question is, was it for religion? Was it for spelling? Or was it for robots?
Let's start with the first big surprise for me. I assumed phonetics was a modern science, maybe, late 19th century industrial revolution stuff.
You would be off by about 2,500 years.
Wow.
If you want to find the gold standard of early phonetics, you have to go back to around 500 BCE in ancient India.
500 BCE. That's 2,500 years ago. So while Athens is experimenting with democracy, India is already doing high-level linguistics.
Correct. And what was happening there was shocking in its sophistication.
Yeah.
You had scholars who were analyzing speech with a level of detail that it compares favorably to 20th century linguistics.
So they were way ahead of the curve.
In many ways, they were millennia ahead of the curve.
Why, though? Why was ancient India so obsessed with how their tongues were moving?
It wasn't just curiosity. It was about survival, specifically the survival of their religious texts, the Vedas.
Okay.
These texts date back even further, to around 1500 BCE.
So 1,000 years before the phoneticians showed up.
Right. And in that 1,000 years, the everyday language people spoke on the street, the vernacular had changed. It evolved, as languages always do.
Uh-huh.
But the Vedas were sacred. They were an oral tradition. And the belief was that the sound itself held power.
Oh, wow. So it wasn't just, let's speak clearly so people understand the sermon. It was, if we say this wrong, the prayer won't work.
Precisely. It was about ritual efficacy. If you mispronounce a mantra, it doesn't work. Or worse, it creates bad karma.
Oh, okay.
The scholars were terrified that because the street language was shifting, the pronunciation of the prayers would drift too. They needed a way to lock it down.
They needed a preservation system, a way to freeze sound in time.
Exactly. And the most famous figure to emerge from this is a grammarian named Panini, who lived around 400 to 350 BCE.
Panini. I love that we have a name. It makes it feel more real.
His work is called the Stadioi, or 8 chapters, and it is arguably one of the greatest intellectual achievements of the ancient world.
So what did he do?
Well, Panini and his contemporaries didn't just list sounds, they built a system. They classified sounds by place of articulation.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener. Place of articulation. That sounds technical.
It sounds technical, but it's actually very physical. It just means, where is the restriction in your mouth? They organized the alphabet into vargas, or groups. So think about the layout of your mouth.
Okay, I'm visualizing my mouth.
First, you have the back of the throat. That's where you make sounds like K and G. That was one group.
Okay.
Then, move forward a bit to the hard palate. That's C, H, and J. Move forward again to the teeth, T and D. And finally, all the way to the lips, P and B.
So if you read their alphabet in order, you're literally taking a tour from the back of your throat to your lips.
Yes, it is a physiological map. They understood that a P and a B are related because they both use the lips. And they went even deeper. They had a concept for the phone,
Now that is a heavy concept. That's a modern linguistics term.
It is. A phone is the smallest unit of sound that changes meaning. The ancient Indians understood this distinction perfectly.
So while Europe was entering,
While Europe was entering what we often call the Dark Ages, where this kind of knowledge was basically non-existent, India had a rigorous scientific system of speech analysis.
that is the part that blows my mind. You have this high-tech linguistic science in India, this grid system of the mouth, and meanwhile, what is happening in Europe?
Very little. For nearly a millennium, Europe produced almost no surviving work on phonetics that could even touch what Panini did.
Why the gap? The Greeks and Romans loved talking. They loved rhetoric.
They loved rhetoric, yes. They loved grammar. But they were focused on the written letter, not the spoken sound. They were analyzing the alphabet, not the mouth.
So India was analyzing the mouth to save the sound.
Exactly.
Okay, so did this knowledge just stay in India? Or did it travel?
It traveled.
Oh,
And the vehicle for that travel was religion again, specifically Buddhism.
right.
As Buddhism spread from India to China between 200 BCE and 200 CE, it brought those Sanskrit texts along with it.
And I imagine Chinese scholars looking at these texts and thinking, wait, how do we map these sounds onto our language? Chinese is tonal. It's totally different from Sanskrit.
It was a massive challenge. But it inspired Chinese scholars to create what they called rhyme tables. They started classifying their own consonants based on the Indian model. They broke sounds down by the lips, the tongue, the molar teeth, the incisor teeth, and the throat.
Molar teeth sounds. That
Yeah.
is a very specific category. It shows they were really looking inside.
It does. But if you want the ultimate example of looking inside the mouth, we have to talk about Korea. This was my favorite aha moment in the reading. King Sejong.
Ah, yes. The 15th century. The Enginate King.
King Sejong is a legend in the history of linguistics. He wanted to create a new alphabet for his people, what we now know as Hangul.
Right, because before that they were using Chinese characters, which were incredibly difficult to learn.
Exactly. They just didn't fit the Korean language well at all. So he wanted literacy for the masses. He wanted a system that was easy to learn.
And he did it.
Right. But he didn't just draw random squiggles. The shapes of the letters in Hangul are instructions. They are iconic.
Iconic how? Like the letter looks like the thing.
Exactly. Take the sound G or K. In Hangul, the letter looks like a right angle. That shape mimics the back of the tongue, raising up to block the throat.
No way. So the letter is a picture of your tongue position.
Yes. And the letter for N, it looks like the tongue touching the upper teeth. The letter for M, it looks like a square representing a closed mouth.
So if you look at a letter, it is basically an articulatory diagram telling you, put your tongue here.
It is a user manual for your mouth built into the writing system.
That is genius. It makes our alphabet look so random. Like, why is A shaped like a triangle? It has nothing to do with my mouth.
It really highlights how advanced Asian linguistics were.
Sure.
And we see a similar pattern in the Arab world around the 7th and 8th centuries CE.
Also driven by religion.
Again, driven by religion. A Quran, yes. The recitation of the Quran required absolute precision, similar to the Vedas. You have figures like Sibawayhi in the 8th century. He was classifying consonants as tense or slack, which corresponds to what we call stops and fricatives today.
And the source mentioned Ibn Sina, or Avicenna, right? The famous philosopher.
Yes, in the 11th century. He was writing about the anatomy of the speech mechanism. He was looking at the cartilages in the throat. So while Europe was relatively quiet on this front, the Arab world kept the science alive and pushed it forward.
Okay, so let's cross back over to Europe. We established it was pretty quiet for a long time. But surely the Romans did something.
There is one exception, the source notes, Quintilian in Rome, 1st century CE. But his contribution wasn't really scientific analysis. It was more of a complaint.
The guy who complained about spelling?
Right. He noticed the gap between how we write and how we speak. He famously complained that the name Gaius is spelled with a C, even though it's pronounced with a G.
Which is a complaint I think every English speaker can relate to. Why is there a G in knight? Why is colonel pronounced colonel?
Exactly. But after the Roman period, we hit that long hiatus, about 1,000 years of silence. It's not until the 12th century that we start seeing some eccentric characters trying to fix things.
Eccentric is the polite word. We have the first grammarian in Iceland.
An anonymous scholar, we don't know his name, so we just call him the first grammarian. He realized that the Latin alphabet didn't fit Icelandic.
Sure.
Icelandic had sounds that Latin didn't, so he tried to clean it up. He used diacritics, little accents, to mark long vowels. He even used dots to show when a vowel should be nasalized, meaning spoken through the nose.
And then there's Orm. I feel like Orm needs his own biopic. He was an English monk in the 1100s, and he wrote this massive text called the Ormulum, and he seemed obsessive.
He was obsessed with people mispronouncing religious texts,
Mhm.
so he invented a spelling system to force them to say it right. His big innovation was doubling consonants.
So if she wrote a letter twice, what did that mean?
It was a signal for the vowel length.
Right.
If you see a double consonant like beep or T, it meant the vowel before it was short. He was trying to lock in the rhythm of the dialect.
That's fascinating.
It looks very strange on the page, but for historians, it's a goldmine because it tells us exactly how English sounded in the 12th century.
It's like a time capsule. But let's jump forward to the Renaissance, the 1600s. The source talks about the English school and the Royal Society. The motivation seems to shift here. It's not just about old prayers anymore.
No, now it's about two things. Spelling reform, because English spelling was already a mess, and a new, very important motivation, teaching the deaf.
This is interesting. I wouldn't have immediately connected teaching the deaf with the history of phonetics. What's the link?
Well, think about it. If someone cannot hear the sound, how do you teach them to speak it? You can't just say cheese.
Right.
You have to show them the mechanics. You have to explain, put your tongue against your teeth and blow air. You can't rely on the ear. You have to rely on tactile sensation and strict physiology.
So you need a rigorous map of the physiology. You need to know exactly which muscles are moving.
Exactly. People like John Wallace and William Holder started mapping the mouth specifically for this purpose. And Francis Ludwig, in 1686, took it a step further. He proposed a universal alphabet.
A universal alphabet.
He wanted related sounds to have related symbols.
That sounds familiar. That
Yeah.
sounds like King Sejong.
It is very similar.
Yeah.
Ludwig almost certainly didn't know about the Korean alphabet, but he came to the same conclusion. The writing should reflect the biology.
It is amazing how these ideas pop up independently. But then we hit the 18th century, and the source describes this as the era where things get physical. We stop looking at letters and start looking at biology.
This is the mad science era.
Yes. Let's talk about Antoine Furain. 1741. What did this guy do?
It is a bit macabre. He wanted to prove how the voice actually works. There was a huge debate at the time. Is the human voice like a flute, a wind instrument, or is it like a violin, a stringed instrument?
Okay. That seems like a reasonable question.
To settle it, Furain took larynx's voice boxes excised from cadavers,
Dead bodies.
fresh dead bodies,
Hmm.
and he blew air through them. He manipulated the vocal cords with strings and tweezers while blowing air from a bellows, and he got them to make sounds.
Can you imagine walking into that lab, just a guy blowing into a disembodied throat to make it squeak?
It sounds horrific, but it was crucial science.
Yeah.
He proved that the airflow causes the vocal folds to vibrate like strings, but driven by wind.
Okay.
He actually coined the term vocal cords because he thought they acted like the strings on a viola.
And that mechanical fascination led to the next big trend. Robots? Or, well, speaking machines.
The late 1700s saw a boom in speech synthesis. You had Christian Kratzenstein in 1781 using acoustic resonators, weirdly shaped tubes, to mimic vowel sounds, and then Wolfgang von Kempelen in 1791.
Describe his machine, because this wasn't digital, this was all analog.
Completely analog. It was a box with a bellows for lungs, a reed for the vocal cords, and a rubber mouth.
A rubber mouth.
Yeah. He would actually put his hand inside the rubber mouth and manipulate it to change the shape while pumping the bellows with his elbow.
He was playing the mouth like an instrument.
Yes. He could produce full sentences. He even realized that he could detect vowel formants, the resonant frequencies that make an A sound different from an O just by listening. He was reverse engineering speech.
That is wild. We went from, how do we spell this, to let's build a mechanical man that speaks.
And that momentum carried right into the 19th century, which was the technology boom. Suddenly we had instruments. We didn't have to guess what was happening in the throat. We could look.
The laryngoscope.
Invented by Benjamin Babington in 1829. Here's a fun connection. Babington wasn't just a doctor. He was a Tamil scholar.
No way. Tamil. As in the language from southern India?
Yes. So we had this weird loop back to Indian languages. But the laryngoscope allowed doctors to finally look down a living throat using mirrors and watch the chords move in real time.
And then there was palatography, which sounds like painting.
It essentially was. They wanted to know exactly where the tongue touches the roof of the mouth. So they would paint a mixture, maybe chocolate, charcoal, or chalk onto a person's tongue or the palate.
And then have them talk.
And the person speaks a single sound. Okay, say tack. Okay, open up.
See where the paint is gone.
And they would look to see where the paint wiped off. It gave us hard visual data on articulation. And all of this accumulated knowledge, the physiology, the mechanics, the geography of the mouth, leads us to the grandfathers of modern phonetics in the late 19th century,
We have to talk about the bells.
Melville Bell. Most people know his son, Alexander Graham Bell, who invented the telephone. But Melville Bell was a titan in phonetics. He created visible speech in 1867.
This goes back to the deaf education, right?
Yes, it was a system of symbols that showed exactly what the throat and tongue were doing. It was incredibly precise. But while Bell was great at description, the real theoretical breakthrough came from Henry Sweet in 1877.
Sweet is often said to be the inspiration for Professor Higgins in Pygmalion, or My Fair Lady. What was his big insight?
He made a crucial distinction between broad and narrow notation. He realized that you can describe every tiny microscopic sound a human makes that's narrow, but not all those differences matter for meaning.
Give me an example. Help me hear the difference.
Okay, think of the words pin and spin.
Pin, spin.
If you put your hand in front of your mouth and say pin, you feel a puff of air on your palm. That's called aspiration.
Okay, yeah.
Now if they spin,
Spin.
there's no puff of air. Physically, those are two different sounds. One has a puff, one doesn't. That is the narrow difference.
But to my brain, they are both just P.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is the broad understanding. Sweet realized that if I swapped them, if I used the spin P and pin, you would still understand the word. It might sound like a weird accent, but the meaning doesn't change.
So he figured out we need to focus on the sounds that change meaning.
Yes.
And that brings us right back to the beginning. That is the foam again.
That is the birth of the foam in the Western scientific sense.
Uh-huh.
And remember, the ancient Indians had figured this out over 2,000 years prior.
It really is full circle. We started with Panini building our WID to save the Vedas, and we end up with Henry Sweet basically rediscovering the same concepts to clarify English.
It really shows that science isn't just about new discoveries. It's about systems. We move from describing letters to describing physiology, the meat and muscle, and finally, with Sweet, to describing the system of language, linguistic phonetics.
So, if the listener takes one thing away from this deep dive, what should it be? We've covered a lot of ground.
I think the takeaway is that knowledge is incredibly fragile. We often think of science as this steady march forward, but in phonetics, we had the answers in 500 BCE. We lost them. We found them again in Korea. We found them in the Arab world. We rediscovered them in 19th century Europe.
Right.
Knowledge isn't a guaranteed inheritance. It has to be actively maintained.
It makes you wonder what we know now that we might forget in a few hundred years. Or conversely, what answers are sitting in a dusty library right now, written in a language we don't study, that has already solved a problem we're struggling with today.
That is the big question. Maybe the key to the next breakthrough in AI or quantum physics is sitting in a 12th century manuscript somewhere. You never know.
Well, next time you open your mouth to speak, maybe give a little thought to the thousands of years of priests, kings, and scientists who tried to figure out how you did it. Thanks for listening to this deep dive.
Keep listening.